So Rakesh Rootsman Rak is an experienced permaculture designer and teacher, forest garden specialist, and one of the founders of Transition Town IG3 and Transition Ilford. He's been growing food for 40 years, and he's been designing and teaching edible landscaping, permaculture, forest gardening, and more for the last 15 years. He's joining us to talk about a current project to gather stories around decolonising permaculture. And he's also a member of the London and South East Transition Hub and the lead link for all international hubs to the Hub's Heart Circle. I will pass over to you, Rakesh, for your 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. So first of all, can you hear me properly? I've just moved to a new, wonderful. Yeah, so I'm currently in India, currently in Chennai, working with some really amazing people who are looking at, who've been creating children's parliaments and neighbourhoodocracy. So working with different neighbourhoods to utilising sociocracy to really meet local people's needs. So it's been really, really incredible. But as you can imagine, internet connection here is really terrible. So first of all, I really want to say a huge thank you to the Transition Network for doing this work, because this is something that's been really close to my heart. As you can see, that I'm not white, I'm not middle class, and since the beginning of Transition Town, I wanted to, for example, to join Transition Brixton, which is close to where I was living at that time as Transition Brixton got started. And I found it very, very, very difficult to actually engage with them, because more or less all of their meetups were in pubs, which for various cultural reasons, I don't go to pubs, mainly because people try to punch me whenever I walk into a pub. Once they get drunk, I always end up someone trying to fight me. And so so for various reasons, I've felt Transition Town to be quite not inclusive at all, and not actually making an effort to include me. And this is not just Transition Town, this happens in the permaculture world, in global eco-village networks, in many groups that are looking at social justice, talk continuously about this work, but actually actively just aren't really doing enough to actually really truly engage. This is something I'll be doing for the Practicing Transition group, actually starting to talk about how to really include people, how to really actively understand people's needs who are on the margins, who are not part of that same white middle class kind of background, because as Rob said in his introduction, quite often most of the people who come to Transition Town, who are attracted to Transition Town, are like the people who are already in Transition Town. And so this is my starting point. And within permaculture, one of the things that I started to look at is some of the reasons as to why permaculture is not fully accepted by many people in from marginal backgrounds. If we look at how permaculture started, it started as a movement to look at how to, in particular, grow food initially in a way that is environmentally friendly, in a way that is fossil fuel free. And it was done by studying nature, how nature creates in richness and abundance. They then, by studying how nature did that, how nature creates all these nutrient cycles, and how no entity within the ecosystem is too greedy. Everything understands, how to understand its limits and live in that ecosystem so that everything can thrive, and diversity and all the rest of it. So they then designed ways in which food around matching that. Hang on, there's something clearly missing, which is the drive for why people would want to do this. And so then they started looking at different cultures for how they that allowed them to really to take care of themselves, take care of others, as well as take care of their environment. So from that, they extracted ethics. So permaculture is based on ethics and understanding how nature creates richness and abundance, and picking out a whole bunch of principles that can then be used to design ecosystems. So, and as we know, many of us will know Rob's story of how he was teaching permaculture, and then started to deeply look at, well, how do we bring permaculture into urban environments rather than it just being the usual beardy weirdies, who are out in rural parts of the world. And I include myself as a beardy weirdy, even if I'm not white middle class. So its roots, permaculture's roots are really deeply stemmed in understanding cultural practices from all over the world, from indigenous peoples all over, whether it's white people, who may nowadays be classified as pagan and very backwards or whatever, classified as somehow being anti-Christian or whatever, and anyone who was deemed someone who understood herbs and medicines was clearly a witch, needs to be eradicated. It comes from people around Asia, around Africa, and actually studying their practices for how they lived in an environmentally friendly way. And so, but the whole system was put together by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, who are two white Australians, but they very, very, very clearly expressed how they got to understand this. They were very clear on saying this came from understanding many, many, many different peoples from around the world. However, now, because the majority of the permaculture teachers are white, middle class, and male as well, the way in which it's portrayed to the world is quite often, this is a white person's prerogative, So when you go to places like India, first of all, India lived completely within its means. It was, it always, up to about 30 years ago, it wouldn't import almost anything. Everything was completely self-contained. So culturally, they knew how to live within their means. However, colonialism came along and said, what are you doing it that way for? That's stupid, that's crazy, you should do it this way. In fact, it wasn't even that nice. It was kind of at the end of a gun, kind of saying, if you don't do it this way, then you have no life left. We will kill you. So in many parts of the world, colonialization completely changed people's abilities to practice what they were doing for thousands of years at the expense of the people. And now you've got more white, so at the hands of white people being told your practices are ridiculous, they're stupid, do it our way. Now, all of a sudden, we've got more well-to-do white middle-class people coming back to India and Asia saying, what are you doing it that way for? You should be doing it like this, permaculture. And so you can understand there's a huge distrust. Here we go again, more colonialists trying to tell us what we should be doing. So my work is to try and see how we can rebuild and collect a whole bunch of stories that very clearly show that actually the roots of permaculture and a lot of the inspiration comes from indigenous peoples all around the world, white, not just people of different colors, but including European cultures. So what I'm doing now is I'm collecting stories. I've just created a spreadsheet or a Google form where we can start accepting stories from people. We will then start to present it once we've collected it. And the idea is that the next permaculture convergence, the next permaculture teachers convergence, I should say, I'll be presenting this work again to the teachers to say, hey, here's some inspiring stories. Here's some inspiring stories that you can tell while you're teaching permaculture to show that it's not, to really show that the roots of where permaculture came from. So I have to admit, it's been quite slow in terms of many people saying, wow, this is fantastic, really love your work, really support you. I'm going to send you some stories, and then nothing happens. And I think so far I've had 2, maybe 3 stories out of about 40, 50 different permaculture teachers who have said they will contribute things. So the work is slow, but I'm not giving up. And while I'm here in India, I'm collecting lots of stories which I will upload myself. Some really, really, really inspiring stories that really encapsulate, the roots of permaculture. So, as I say, it's kind of in a way, very. I'm losing my words here, but it's very descriptive of some of the problems that we face, where many people want to do something, but there's, we lack so much time, and maybe people's drive, priorities aren't necessarily always there. Sometimes it's just about survival.